right. Hello, everyone. We're going to start in a minute or so. We're just waiting for participants to join. Slowly, numbers are going up. Perhaps we should have arranged for some elevator music, but in the absence of that, very good. Let me welcome everyone who's joined so far. We're going to give it another half a minute. All right, I think we're good to go. Numbers are stabilizing. Hi, everyone. The comments have started. This is very good. All right, I think we've hit critical mass, very punctual. Thank you to everyone for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what you are. My name is Vassilis Ntousas. I'll be the moderator of today's event. I'm the head of European operations at the Alliance for Securing Democracy at GMF. This is the part of GMF that seeks to analyze and expose and counter foreign information manipulation and interference attacks and operations in democracies. Again, now that I see we've reached, okay, a good number, I wanted to say I was delighted to see overwhelming interest in today's discussion, truly. And therefore, I am delighted to welcome so many of you to today's virtual event. I think the reason why there is such an interest is clear. You don't have to be an expert to recognize that we live in an era of an intensifying FIMI attack threat landscape. We're not just talking about isolated incidents happening in distant parts of the world or solely in democracies, frontline states like Moldova, Ukraine. What we're facing is happening here inside the EU, targeting our democratic institutions, our media landscapes, our public discussions, the decision-making processes that are happening at member state level and EU level, and of course the political outcomes. Why? Because it has perhaps never been easier or cheaper or faster for bad actors to launch these operations, these attacks. The actors themselves are multiplying. We have a proliferation there. It's not just about Russia or China. We're seeing many more actors, state actors, being involved in these operations, and we're seeing the private sector entering the fold as well. We're seeing tools that are being used becoming sharper and more refined, more sophisticated. And of course, our digital interdependencies, the openness of our systems expanding. And at the same time, we have emerging disruptive technologies only beginning to show their full impact, further amplifying the challenge we're facing. Now, to help us understand more about this challenge and more critically about the EU's role in countering and defending and countering against this challenge, we're joined by two excellent speakers. Nad'a Kovalčíková, who's a senior analyst with EU ISS, the EU Institute for Security Studies. Nad'a, welcome. And Péter Krekó, who's a visiting fellow with GMF's Engaging Central Europe program, and he's also the director of the Political Capital Institute. Both experts in the field. They've written, they've spoken extensively about these topics, both on the diagnostical part, what is it that we're facing, but also on the response part, what is it that we can do. Before giving them the floor, a couple of housekeeping notes. The first one is that this panel takes place within the framework of the AUTHLIB project, Neo-Authoritarianism in Europe and the Liberal Democratic Response. that is led by the Central European University and supported by the European Commission. And AUTHLIB operates the motto, if you want, the organizing principle is that in order to protect the future of liberal democracy in Europe, we must first understand the challengers to it. And that is precisely what we're aiming to do today as we explore the challenge of FIMI against our democracies. And the second point to make is that the event is recorded. So please keep that in mind. We will start with a moderated part of the discussion first. I'll ask a few questions to Nad'a and Péter. And then there will be, and I promise this, there will be plenty of time dedicated to your own questions. So please do submit those questions using the chat function. I will get to these the moment we're done with some introductory remarks by our two speakers. And without further ado, let's move to the juicy part of the discussion. Péter, I'm going to start with you. You've recently published a paper, a very interesting working paper within the framework of this project, with the very, very interesting title, Brainwashing of the People by the People with the People, Mass Persuasion and Systemic Disinformation in Democratic and Non-Democratic Contexts. Now, the report is super interesting. That title is a mouthful. I was wondering if you can help us understand, drawing from insights of the reports, where we are. If you offer some scene-setting remarks that I think will be useful for our discussions and essentially frame our discussion. Péter, the floor is yours.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot, Vassilis, for the introduction. Thanks for having me today, and I'm happy to be in this panel with Nad'a. And yeah, I will very briefly introduce some findings of the report that is about quite a lot of things. If any of you is interested in the audience to read it and provide some feedback, I will be very grateful. I would say this is still work in progress, but I would like to publish it somewhere, maybe in some journal, even if it's more intended for some policy use. And let me make some remarks at the very beginning. First of all, I would like to thank for the German Marshall Fund of the United States for organizing this event, and also for Zsuzsa Bék, for Dani Hegedűs, for Jörg Forbig, for providing support for this work, also for Nicolas Boucher, who helped to edit the paper. And also I would like to thank for colleagues at the CEU Democracy Institute, at the DRD working group, who provided very valuable feedback when I presented the first draft of this paper. And in particular, I would like to thank to Zsolt Enyedi, András Schedler, Alexander Bohr, who gave very important insights. All omits and problems and shortcomings of the papers remain on my own. I have to say it at the very beginning. So I would like to highlight 5 short points. I have 5 minutes, as Vassilis told me, so I would like to keep it very brief as a kickoff, and then yeah, we can continue with other aspects of the topic. So first of all, I would like to start by saying that one of the arguments of the paper is that the current information environment provides much more opportunities for efficient mass attitude control than the era when the totalitarian regimes have been born in Europe, or at, let's say, the peripheries of Europe. So we can remind ourselves that the Soviet Union and Mussolini's fascist Italy have born practically 100 years ago, 1922, and they could they could control, of course, not in a total manner, but they could control quite efficiently societies, also in the information space, using the press media and also radio. And practically these were the communication channels that were available at that time. Today, compared to that, we have technological tools that are incomparably more powerful. For example, data science, generative artificial intelligence, natural language processing, also astroturfing, and there's a very sophisticated toolkit of tracking public opinion much more than before, and also of framing the attitudes and also of changing the attitudes from production until the dissemination. And generative artificial intelligence is efficiently providing more tools on that. Of course, we have the social media platforms that can also amplify the impact of the persuasive messages through the community and also through social identity. So the technological toolkit is incomparably more powerful, which also, I think, to a certain extent, puts it into question that do we still have the theoretical, preconditions for democratic decision making by the voters, in the sense that if you have these very sophisticated tools, then according to a lot of experiences and also experiments, can change voters' attitudes somehow, sometimes in an unconscious manner, then maybe the free and informed decision that would be the precondition of any democratic regimes are in danger because of this technological advancement. Second, what I found is that the line between the authoritarian and non-authoritarian countries, or democratic and non-democratic countries, are increasingly blurred when it comes to practices of mass attitude control. So some of the techniques, for example, that is used by, let's say, the Communist Republic of China, People's Republic of China, are also emerging in democratic societies. For example, to try to control online discussions and online the democratic discussions through troll and bot armies that try to shift the discussion in certain directions. We can see that, for example, mass surveillance tools, for example, face detection, are also spreading in the democratic world as well. So the surveillance techniques and also the persuasion techniques that it's used by autocratic regimes, I think, are increasingly emerging in democratic regimes as well. And here I would just like to quote the report of the Oxford Internet Institute, who found in a report back to 2021 that 80 countries in the world, in 80 countries in the world, there are state actors or proxies who use manipulated social media content in an industrial scale and spreading disinformation to persuade the voters. And these are actors where these players have some kind of legitimacy of the state. So they are either in the executive branch or at the legislative branch. And given that largest countries in the world are all using these techniques, including China, Pakistan, Brazil, but also this list includes some European countries, also big ones like, let's say, Germany, Italy, and also the United States. We can say that more than half of the population in the world lives in countries where their elected leaders are trying to spread disinformation and use computational propaganda on an industrial scale. And of course, it does not mean that the People's Republic of China and, let's say, the United States or Germany are on the same point on this scale, but the techniques are definitely spreading. And the Oxford Internet Institute could observe a spread of such computational propaganda techniques by state actors in the last few years. So my third point would be that still mass persuasion is not omnipotent. So I don't want to paint an Orwellian world, because with all the psychological knowledge we have, with all the technological sophistication we have, this is still impossible, or so far it has been impossible, to totally control any societies, even in classical totalitarian societies, according to some historical research. I quoted some in the report. Even in Nazi Germany, there has been quite a lot of dissent towards the regime, according to some polls, some secret service measures. We, of course, have imperfect knowledge. Even today in countries, let's say, at least in the Western part of the world, that try their best to impose a very strong control on the public opinion, and Hungary is a notable example. Hungary is the only informational autocracy, I would say, in the European Union. Right now, we can see that the opposition is more popular than the governmental side, and also that the government, with using almost unlimited amounts of funds, are facing huge challenges in trying to spread its narratives or even framing in politics. So, and by the end of the day, I would also argue that the disinformation narratives that spread well in a certain environment are not just spread well because people are brainwashed, but because the voters themselves want to believe in certain narratives that are provided somehow, not only by institutional actors, but by grand narratives that usually are delivered by charismatic personalities who can put all these messages into a context where they seem much more credible, and the question of factuality becomes secondary. So I think we do not regard voters as just passive information processing machines that are just taking over the information, but they are actively contributing in a lot of cases in their deception, and they can have some psychological advantages of believing in some disinformation narrative, and we can discuss it later. But and also, even if it sounds, I mean, it does not sound that optimistic, but also it gives us some hope that the democratic element of the regimes, where there is still, at least to a certain extent, free elections remains, because if there is no way of total attitude control, then the voters have their agency. And yeah, the third point would be, and I will very quickly conclude, that we need a new vocabulary and some new theories when trying to grasp the features of this new information environment. So I think we neither the theories that we have from totalitarian regimes and the descriptions, neither the theories that we have from democratic regimes, for example, the marketplace of free ideas, as Péter Pomerantsev argues, that practically does not exist in the current social media space. So these are obsolete to a certain extent, and we have to come up with some new terminology. I provided some in the paper. And lastly, I would one remark on FIMI as well, because what I have discussed so far is mainly domestic information and media interference. So what I would like to argue is that FIMI can be mostly efficient in environments where there are domestic players who are delivering the disinformation messages. And if there are no credible domestic political players that are spreading the narratives of a hostile superpower, usually they do not fall on a fertile soil. So it is usually in cooperation with domestic actors, and therefore this domestic foreign dichotomy in practice does not always work that well. So I will stop here, and and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Péter. And for anyone interested, the link to your paper has been shared in the chat. So please do do read it. I have read it myself. Péter gave us a sneak preview of what's in it, and certainly the new vocabulary request, the new theories request, that is, towards the end of the paper was very interesting to me as I read it as someone who's interested in the topic. Many thanks indeed. Nad'a, we heard a lot. Péter put a lot on the table. We're not in Kansas anymore, but nor are we in an Orwellian environment in which there is no hope. Where do you think we stand? And by we, I mean the EU. What sort of key threats do we face in the EU? How has this threat landscape on FIMI evolved over the past few years? What is the moment we're finding ourselves in? Curious to hear what you have to say on the topic. Nad'a.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vassilis, and thank you so much, Peter, for the brief overview. There is so much in your report, so there is a lot to also disclose further and elaborate on. Good afternoon to everyone. For me, you asked where do we stand? I'm still happy that we still stand. Indeed, the scope of all these operations is huge and is growing, and it's really intricate and interconnected. And especially, I think the timing of this event is excellent. Last week, there was the release of the third report of the External Action Service on countering FIMI. And I think it was quite telling to see that the level of the event and the attention to the event was extremely high. The High Representative, the Vice President of the European Commission was speaking there. There was also representation across partner countries, international organizations such as NATO. There were also experts and also representatives from the partner countries in the Eastern neighborhood, as you also mentioned earlier on. The impact we see really recently also in the elections, be it in Moldova or what's happening in Georgia, or also constantly in the Western Balkans and other places that are very close, if not part of the European family. So I think we are facing very serious threats, but more than threats, we are facing the reality of the interference directly across different domains. And FIMI is one of those areas where we are paying, I think, and should pay more attention, also seeing how it is being exploited, how this tactic of interference is being used, especially during also the Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, which is happening on the borders of the EU, on the borders of NATO, and it's already, happening for over 3 years. So this is very long and exhausting effort that is relentless by Russia, but also, as Peter very eloquently mentioned, there are various actors. So they're not, it's not only Russia, but Russia is really currently, I think, very clearly one of the major, if not the major actor when it comes to the lead in amplifying these FIMI operations, but we also see other actors being also state and non-state actors. And I think here, when it comes to where are we today and where were we before? So, for example, from the EU perspective, only if you look what the focus of this EAS reports on FIMI was in year 1, it was more in this introductory methodology standardization approach. So let's get on the same page. Let's try to speak common language. Let's have some common understanding. Let's have some common TTPs, procedures, how we can identify, detect, and also analyze these issues. Then we saw in the second report move to the response framework based on evidence to be able to address this more effectively in a coordinated way, but also in a structured way. And here today, we have the third report that is focusing on these exposure metrics and really trying to increase the understanding of how broad, especially the digital landscape of these FIMI operations is, what's the whole architecture, as much as it can showcase the state actors online across different social media platforms, across different geographical areas, but also the other maybe less on our radar, more covered or less public accounts that are part of this broad ecosystem that help amplify, enable these operations being more effective and reach more people across all kinds of channels through different influential accounts, and most of them obviously being, or many of them being inauthentic accounts. So the architecture we see that has been exposed in this third report is looking at 38,000 channels across different countries, all these different incidents, FIMI incidents, and they are just a sample. So then we can understand how big this, how vast these online operations are. For me, what I would like to also make sure that whenever we speak about this very broad ecosystem online, we are keeping in mind that this is part of the operations that are also offline, and these operations are connected and combined, FIMI operations combined with other things that are happening, being the economic coercion or the transnational repression or cyber threats or cyber attacks directly, and many other hybrid threat domains. And usually when we are looking at this, they are happening even in parallel. And if not, they are surely part of a bigger operational strategy that I think it's important to connect these different interference. So what we understand today more than maybe 8 years ago, when we started to pay more attention also at the EU level to establishing different task forces from the East Task Force. We also focus now more on also on the Middle East, also on Sub-Saharan Africa. So really seeing the global perspective of this and how different actors behave across the world, and if the tools and the toolkit is the same, and it is also being sometimes tested somewhere and then implemented elsewhere, deployed later on in a stronger way than before, as we also see that some of the countries or occasions, elections or different events are this kind of test beds, and then you see it in the full-scale war, full-scale invasion being implemented in a much stronger and much more offensive way. So this is definitely part of what we saw as or see as evolution. When it comes to understanding, the evolution comes to us, or we have now the understanding that this is part of the security and defense landscape issues. This is not a communication threat only. We will not solve it only with strategic communication approach and enhancement. We need different tools. We need a broader toolkit. So hence why we have also developed this FIMI toolbox at the EU level. It's part of the strategic compass strategy that is meant to be implemented by overall by 2030, but it's a work in progress. And we see that in addition to the cyber diplomacy toolbox, hybrid toolbox, we have now FIMI toolbox using different instruments. And what is interesting to note that, as I mentioned, that this is no longer just a communication issue and we need to speak better and more and to others. It's a security threat, and there are also sanctions that have been adopted and that have been already also deployed whenever the attribution was clear enough and could be used as an additional, more powerful tool. Because as you mentioned, Péter, as the actors, the hostile actors are using more powerful tools. We also are looking at how we can develop more powerful tools to address these increasingly threatening and problematic issues that are integrated within also more conventional threats and are probably very much enhancing the effect of them. So that's one, this change of understanding, but also kind of developing from this disinformation focus where we try to analyze multiple narratives. We try to understand what are the trends and patterns and what are the repeated narratives and how are they used across different platforms, different countries. We also went to this FIMI approach, the foreign information manipulation and interference, where we see that the focus needs to also go maybe even much more on who are the actors. What is the behavior? How do they cooperate, coordinate, or how do they even behave in this infrastructure, being both online and offline covered and overt operations, but also what is the degree and the effect of these interference campaigns. And here the aspect is that we can look more into the amplification. Also, we can maybe leverage more the attribution that is also very important aspect, but therefore to lead to accountability. I think one of these issues that we are still working on, even if you identify, you detect, you analyze, and you are able to attribute, how do you make the responsible actors accountable for this, and how do you deter them also in the future? So how do you raise the costs of these operations? So I think these are the issues that we still need to keep addressing and evolve our own strategies to be effectively addressing these issues, to ensure that we don't only struggle to defend ourselves, but we could lead in a more perhaps brighter future of the environment where we will be more equipped and prepared and resilient, and but also perhaps deter these operations. And so here I think it's a very nice topic of conversation, how optimistic we can be about this, where are we today with this, and also seeing the paper and the analysis and data that Peter, you gathered, I think we are in a little bit dark spot at the moment. It feels, I mean, it is, we have the ongoing Russia's war on the border. So I think this is an urgent matter, that we feel this urgency, and that's why I think we are continuing to discussing this increasingly more, and also as part of the hybrid threats operations. So not only as a separate issue of disinformation or FIMI.
Thanks, Nad'a. Thank you for adding to the doom and gloom as to the moment, but also contextualizing a little bit what we've attempted to do in response to that. I'd be very tempted to ask you for a telegraphic answer as to where you think we're still, or whether you think we're still playing catch up, or we're on top of the game. But I see that the question has started. I was mistaken. Don't use the chat function, use the Q&A function that now appeared. So do keep them coming. We'll get to that in 5 or so minutes. The first person has already asked a question, so I want to see more. Peter, very quickly back to you. These attacks are increasingly politicized, internally, externally, but since you focused also on the internal aspect of the EU, there are member states in which FIMI, fake news, disinformation is weaponized. And certainly across the continent, we're seeing the increasing politicization, not just weaponization, but politicization. I wonder, as democratic societies, if you have an easy, short, punchy answer to how we can counter these threats while staying true to our democratic credentials, striking a balance between countering the phenomenon, countering, combating, fighting FIMI, but also protecting free speech, which I know it's a speaking point of those who think that we as democracies are not doing well enough on this front. Curious to hear your thoughts on this, and then we'll move to the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you, just very briefly, and thanks a lot for the remarks, Nad'a. I really appreciate, your very comprehensive response. And I mean, I would make a surprisingly optimistic remark here, in the sense that I think the European Union is more or less on a good track in terms of identifying foreign threats, and also for identifying the possible best tools against them, and also for moderating the social media space, which I think is honestly totally inevitable. And I find calls for total freedom of speech in the online space a bit of hypocritical, in the sense that it has never really been a total free environment. I mean, if you just think about how much, pornographic, violent, and so on content are automatically moderated when you are looking, for example, to the social media space, I think it is moderated, but for a good reason. I think factuality and also the dangers of a certain message should be also important principles taken into consideration during the moderation. So I think the Digital Services Act and the code of conduct that will turn into code of practice of disinformation, that aim to create a bit more factful, more safe and democratic social media space, are important steps. The European Media Freedom Act, that aim to provide a bit more diversity and pluralism of the media space, is, I think, also a very important step, if of course the member states will comply, which is a question, but still it's important. And also I think Europe have Europe woke up in many sense and facing this challenge. And Nad'a mentioned the important external challenges, but we have in some of the European Union member states as well. We have seen the recent elections in Germany. We could see the elections in Romania. That I think the social media algorithms that we do not really understand sometimes can produce electoral outcomes that we do not necessarily can grasp and understand. So I think we are, as Nad'a also said, have progressed a lot in terms of comprehension of the whole problem. Of course, tackling it is still remaining a challenge. And I would put a last remark here. I think, to Nadja's point that this is a security threat. Let's remember, for example, that there was a Russian influence operation during the COVID crisis, for example, to undermine the trust in the Western vaccines. It just showed that disinformation, it's deadly dangerous and can really cost human lives. Also, China have spread conspiracy theories at that time as well, that the United States is behind the whole COVID crisis. We know it from research that people who give credit to such conspiracy theories have vaccinated themselves with much lower likelihood, and also did not defend themselves from the virus. So I think we have a lot of evidence from the last few years that this is clearly a security issue. And I think when it comes to comprehension, at least, we are much better than we were before.
Péter, thanks, and you agree with Nad'a. We're much better understanding the bad things these bad actors are doing, how we analyze this behavior. The question we'll turn to eventually is whether we're doing enough and what can we do more of in order to defend ourselves better. The questions have started. I think in terms of the leaders in conducting FIMI threats, we will all but answer that. Nad'a, why don't you start with the first one, which is, you hinted at that. Why have we dumped the term fake news? Why have we moved to FIMI? But I also want you to take, if you can, before we move to the responses part, whether what's happening in the US right now with the Trump administration, whether that has an impact on how Europe is to go about in terms of battling, countering this phenomenon.
Absolutely, and I'm very, very happy to see all the questions coming in. Not easy ones, good ones, relevant to answer. Of course, I'll try my best on this first one. Of course, everything is interconnected. This US is EU's main strategic partner. It's an ally. It's a trade partner in many ways, but it's also a country from where social media companies are growing and came from in a way, and the impact and the magnitude of their presence in our public sphere is huge. And the presence also of different narratives that are circulating about the EU, about the strength of the bond, about war of Russia against Ukraine, all of this has and travels, of course, to our information space. And this is something that we at the EU and across, I think, the world are watching very closely and need to address as much as possible. And I think the impact I see is that we have even more narratives now that are meant to be divisive somehow, are exploited also by these hostile actors. So we are, of course, at the EU still looking for the ways of how to preserve unity, how to preserve the transatlantic bond as well, also in this information space. But I think we are also very much aware that we are in a difficult situation. There is a lot of tension. There is a lot of also maybe growing frustration. There are the security needs. There are the ongoing talks at the same time on defense, and this is all related. So we, of course, have to take it into consideration of the context. What is the context of this, and how do we ensure that we do have a clear understanding and monitor very closely the impact of different situations that the EU and the US is currently involved in. And I want to just address also this question very closely, because when it comes to the social media companies, for me, what I see as an important thing to keep doing is to keep implementing what we have already agreed on. And I think that's already on its own. It feels, at least at this point, already an achievement just to implement what we have agreed on. And also, as Péter mentioned, seeing how the self-regulatory code of practice on disinformation transforms in this code of conduct. We think the Digital Services Act then gains more leverage, perhaps more power, but still, Vassilis, coming back to your questions, is this enough? Can we do more? This is not enough. And we can and we have to do more. And for me, what I do hope that we continue doing in this domain, that we continue with this initial mindset that these are the first steps, being the regulatory steps, being the non-regulatory, the policy, or different types of network or engagement with civil societies, academia, experts, journalists. This European Media Freedom Act is very important as well in this domain, how to support the investigative, independent journalism, but also how to protect those journalists and what are the consequences in case they are harassed or they are coerced or directly attacked. And there was a very interesting festival. And you were there, Vassilis. It was the Festival of European Journalism a few weeks ago. And there we also saw how does the media landscape and the business landscape of social media companies, but also the big tech and the advertisers and the civil society and the governments have very different roles, but important roles to play. And how can we ensure that we at least continue in Europe with the efforts of the leadership, perhaps we could even say leadership role, where the regulatory measures should contribute to being more effective in addressing this, but are not the only solution. And in my view, have an opportunity and space to really grow, to protect and to also enable different actors to be operating in this space more freely. So also when there is, let's say, some tendencies of manipulation, being the algorithms, as you mentioned, or the business models, or in a way not allowing and enabling other media to have space. So this pluralism, which is very big aspect of democratic societies, could be endangered. We need to also think of strategies how to address that. And I think in the context of transatlanticism, these are important things we may need to dive deeper into.
Thanks, Nad'a. And indeed, you're right. The defender community can rely on existing regulatory steps that have been taken, and new ones we have to invent or we're shaping at the moment. But the responsibility to defend lies with everyone. Everyone is, in a way, every democratic citizen, every institution, every media organization should be part of a holistic strategy to counter the phenomenon. And indeed, some of these questions have that as their unifying thread. How can we be more resilient as citizens, as the EU? What can we do is essentially the message I'm seeing in some of these questions. Péter, 2-3 minutes, a quick answer to that. What can we do as citizens, as the EU, in terms of countering? You're muted.
Yeah, I just realized that. Yeah, so as citizens, I would provide 3 recommendations, and I would say that I think everyone lives with the same dilemma. So I don't think the question is really good in the sense that everyone is vulnerable to disinformation to a certain extent, and we like to think that it's always others who can be deceived by foreign actors, by domestic political players, but all of us are vulnerable. So first of all, I think in today's information environment where information overload can bring us to uncertainty in many issues. And I think we have to realize that more information is not necessarily leads to more knowledge. And beside, I think just thinking about how to consume more information, let's say reading into 1,000 articles in a day, maybe, we have to shift to a mode where we read, let's say, more in-depth analysis about a certain topic and not thousands of news items, because it just kind of confuses us. So I think that today, maybe it's not just the consumption and obtaining the information, but filtering the information might be a more important skill that we have to train ourselves. And also, I think that we have to, educate also the next generations. Second, I think is, and I think, one recommendation, for example, the constant notifications, for example, are in a lot of cases, according to many experiments, are just leading to lower levels of cognitive functioning, in the sense that it just drives away attention. So I think we have to really filter out the information and to try to keep the focus to many issues in this ADHD environment that we are living. Second, checking our biases. So we have to be careful that all the strong opinions we have make us vulnerable to manipulation. And I usually recommend that if we have, let's say, news sites that always frame articles in a way that we want and always just reassures our opinion. If we find a website like that, we can be pretty sure that we are manipulated, because usually reality is more boring and more complex than the hyper-partisan sites and information distortive sites suggest. And third, I think the fact-checker community that have been built up partially with the support of some of the tech companies, partially with the support of the European Union, I think is a very valuable resource of knowledge, in the sense that if we do not have enough time to do our own research, there is a lot of fact-checking, especially in English, but also in German, in French, in Hungarian as well. And so I'm part of a project called Hungarian Digital Media Observatory, with the support of the European Commission, having an important fact-checker partner, LACMOS. And many of the of the fake news or disinformation that is spreading out there have already been debunked. And I think it's an important resource of knowledge. There is many criticism of fact-checking sites claiming that it's a highly elitistic project, but I think it's a perfect source for citizens, for journalists, and for experts and policymakers as well to check certain information if you just don't have the 1.5, 2, or 3 hours to do your own research. Someone else have done it for you already.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for being so concrete. These are 3 simple things, and I would underline the last one. The expert community, which is not the fact-checking colleagues, but the expert community working on this topic, needs to be supported, funded appropriately, because it's a critical chain in the Defender community. I have a very specific sanctions-related question. Nad'a, if you can take that up, but just mindful of time, be telegraphic if you can in your answer. So we have a little bit of time left for concluding remarks.
So on the sanctions, how effective they are, I think in this domain of addressing FIMI, countering FIMI, I think sanctions, depending how costly they are and how high the price of it is, and I mean financially, but also reputation-wise, it is more at the moment in a way of disrupting the operations. It's not going to stop them. It's not going to solve it. The actors will not suddenly move to another job. I think it is really to also disrupt these operations, to slow it down, to make it more difficult. And that's part of the strategy. And I think that works to that extent of what it can achieve, to make it more difficult for the malign actors to operate in this domain. And we see that when it comes because it can be not only the organizations, it can be also private actors, it can be also entities, businesses. So in that context, it's more as a disruptor to yet another tool to make it more challenging, but I do think it's part of and has to remain part of a much broader package. Perhaps we could discuss if the sanctions should be higher, more comprehensive, more frequent. But since it is quite a new tool, I think it's a work in progress in that sense. And maybe I'll just want to add another recommendation quickly. When it comes to the funding, yes, I think funding of different initiatives, expert evidence-based efforts, but I think also importantly, the media ownership needs to be really very closely watched, and what are also the practices that are being used by different owners, and perhaps discuss what is and what is not media, and then what kind of regulation or rules need to be followed. So here, very specifically, if we speak about social media, that, if the decision is that this is media, then the rules need to be applied as to the media. If we decide that it's not media and it's a business, then it has to be fully that, but not live in this gray zone of somehow not being clear what animal that is, and therefore how to treat it. I think that makes us more vulnerable and makes our efforts less effective.
Thanks, Nad'a, the concreteness of that recommendation, but also for speaking to the more technical nature. And I do agree, if there are restrictive measures in place, the full extent of that, the full impact of that, positive and negative, for our democracies and for the bad actors respectively, still hasn't been explored. You can say the same thing about DSA, other tools we have in place. There's still considerable room to grow in terms of our responses. Mindful of time, we have about 7 minutes ahead of us. If there are no more questions from the audience, there is, let me just take the last ones. We have one from Bart. Do you believe that our state actors actively pursuing FIMI operations in Europe? I think we've covered that. Russia and China have been mentioned as key culprits in that domain. And of course, Péter was kind enough to also remind us that there are domestic actors who find this toolkit increasingly enticing and alluring. And then John's question, many narratives are attributable to foreign actors. He doesn't wish to downplay the threat that FIMI poses, but many narratives actually originate or amplified in organic ways by domestic actors. So what you said, Péter. So are we missing something in current conversations of FIMI that neglects information manipulation originate domestically? Just to add to that question, a lot of what Nad'a has referred to in terms of what the EAS has done had FIMI at its core because of mandate purposes. DSA has the domestic landscape in mind, but we said it still has untapped potential, and it should throw in our discussion, the fact that the Commission is preparing this new shiny thing called the European Democracy Shield that is to focus on some of these issues. But Péter, as a concluding remark, also taking John's point into account, are you happy with where the EU is at the moment in terms of its response? And if not, what can we do? What is realistic to expect for the EU to do? What is its role, as the title of today's virtual event suggests?
Yeah, thank you. Easy question. So I would say that I mean, I'm living in Hungary, where the information space is how to say rich. I mean, quite rich in disinformation. So I would not say that when it comes to implementation of the good policy directions that I think have been set already in the European Union. There is no work to be done. But again, there is also a compliance issue increasingly that I think will come up in the future as well. So if member states do not comply with EU directives, regulations, sometimes with even the legal obligations, then the toolkit remains. I mean, there is a toolkit that remains, but it's more hardball than anything else. So I think that the compliance will be the most important factor in the future. I think that, yeah, as it was, I think going forward in the same direction that Nad'a also highlighted, yeah, identifying FIMI, Digital Services Act, Code of Practice on Code of Conduct on disinformation, and European Media Freedom Act, I think are steps in the good direction. But on the other hand, I think this is where, and especially when it comes to foreign, the European Media Freedom Act, politicians in the EU with increasingly authoritarian tendencies will be very reluctant to implement any of these steps because it would be the very challenge to their power. So I think that remains a crucial point. And just short reflection on John's important question. I would say that one important element in which many domestic audiences resonate to the messages of foreign malign actors are the anti-Western narratives. And it's a bizarre thing, but increasingly populist politics is selling a product that is about the questioning of the values and of the institutions of Western democratic societies. And in times of increasing this content and in times of increasing polarization, the messages of the foreign actors can be really attractive to many because it reflects their discontent to their elected leaders and also to their institutions. So I think that's where there is clearly interconnection between foreign and domestic narratives and problems.
Thank you, Péter. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for this concise answer. And you're right, the boundaries between domestic, international, democratic, non-democratic, who uses these bad tactics, who is a bad actor, and what can be done to ensure enforcement or compliance, they're becoming murkier by the day, which makes our work as analysts and as people who invest time and energy in developing strategies to counter these bad actors, these bad tactics, all the more important. Nad'a, over to you. You've certainly hinted at the fact that the EU has gone on a constructive journey so far, with a lot still to be done. How would you mark the EU so far, the EU's actions so far, and a last concluding remark on what you see as a critical role the EU has to play in this fight?
I think on the right track, as also Péter recognized. That's very, thanks so much for this assessment. It's a lot of effort. There are a lot of actors. There is also different institutions. So it does also take into consideration more than just the foreign security aspects. There is a lot of ongoing coordination efforts within the Commission when it comes also to the proposals of the regulation, but also just to coordinate the efforts overall and think of what the funding could also be like, where we can contribute, where other actors perhaps are not contributing, other allies, where EU can step up also its efforts. So I think these are important discussions now. I think one other thing that we can discuss more, considering the discussions on the upcoming multi-annual financial framework within the EU, is where this countering of FIMI operation can fit within these discussions. Is there more or different targeting, different funds, different projects that could be in a way in the future developed and coordinated also with the other actors through this whole of society approach? I think the proactive defense is important, and one of the things that EU has been doing and should continue doing is to do it with its values and principles preserved, and making sure that that is understood as a strength, that it is understood as a powerful tool where we do not have to fall to the lowest denominator, while at the same time staying realistic and also adapt to perhaps evolving environment. And therefore, I'm talking about this proactive defense, because some of the questions alluded to it. There may be more tools we can use in combination with FIMI toolbox. I speak often about the nexus between FIMI and cyber operations. I mean, especially in the digital sphere, where we have a lot to learn from the respective frameworks and integrate them perhaps in a more systematic way. And then our responses can also cover more ground when we are addressing these threats in combination.
Thanks, Nad'a. A lot has happened. A lot still needs to happen. We've grown much more knowledgeable about the topic, about these bad actors, who they are, what we can do in terms of understanding their behavior. And perhaps we've developed tools as to what we can do to better counter them. At the same time, the problem itself has grown, has metastasized. Many more bad actors, domestic and international, interesting in approaching politics, in attacking our democracies via FIMI lens. There is a lot of work that needs to be done at individual level, at citizen level, at leadership level as well. And somewhere in between, the expert community's role is also critical. It needs to be supported, not just the funding part, but also, let me just add one last comment, the political will to treat this as the threat it actually is. If we do recognize that information integrity is fundamental for our democracies, not an abstract, an add-on, but it is fundamental, then we need to treat the threats against it as equally existential.
Absolutely.
So with that, let me thank Nad'a and Péter and Nad'a for the wonderful insights and for the very, I should say, concrete recommendations they gave us. Nad'a, Péter, thanks.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Vassilis, thank you all.
Thank you to so many of you who stayed with us throughout this hour. Thank you also to those who submitted questions. Let me also thank the engaging Central Europe team, Zuzana, Dimitar, Daniel, without whom today's event would not have been made possible. You guys rock. Do stay in touch with the good work that GMF is doing. We at the Alliance for Securing Democracy produce analysis and reports on these topics, but also do stay in touch, much more importantly, with the AUTHLIB project, and to stay in the loop about AUTHLIB, its beautiful things, events, reports, analysis that is coming. Sign up for the mailing list, and I believe a colleague has shared a link to that mailing list. Many thanks to everyone attending. Péter, I believe you want to say one last sentence. Special prerogative of the moderator, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm really happy that this discussion could happen. And I think it's also important to remind ourselves that despite many statements, disinformation is a problem for everyone. Even the ones who feel today that they are the beneficiaries of disinformation can be the real victims of disinformation tomorrow. So I think it's in interest of all democratic actors in the transatlantic domain to keep this topic on the agenda and to save our democracies and social systems from all the threats that we have been discussing.
Thanks, Péter. Very important addition. Thanks, everyone. I hope to see you soon in another interesting and, may I just add, timely and important debate like this one. Many thanks. Have a wonderful afternoon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.